I was using partying, drinking, binge watching TV series as a bit of, when you think about happiness, the experience of happiness mostly comes from the relationships we have around us, whether that's from your partner, your loved ones, your family, your close friends. And I was very stereotypically Chinese. I was shy, I was introverted. Many of us are exhausted, not because we're doing too much, but because we are running someone else. I went through a period of my life in which I literally had no energy, no motivation, no inspiration. But as soon as I started addressing my physical and mental energy, things started changing drastically and in very crazy ways.
Thank you so much for taking time out on the bank holiday weekend as well. Appreciate that.
My pleasure. It's the one bank holiday weekend I don't mind working through because it's the week, it's basically publication week. So I think I can let myself off just this one year though.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me as part of that working weekend. It's great to have you here. I like to use this podcast as a little bit of a magnifying glass on people's lives because, you look at it from the outside and, as we said, we're on the verge of your first book, which I'm sure we will talk about. You're a public speaker. You've spoken at many prestigious companies and places. But who's the real Simon Alexander Ong? Can we get into that and a bit about the journey of what brought you to this point today where you're about to launch your book?
Yeah, definitely. I'll sort of give a bit of background and I'll let you sort of dissect where you think it'll be interesting to explore further, Sanjay. But if you're sort of thinking about where the real Simon Alexander Ong came from, when I was young, I was one of two brothers to Malaysian Chinese parents. And I was very stereotypically Chinese. I was shy. I was introverted. I was always focused on trying to be the best in my class academically. So growing up in a Chinese family, to have that sort of pressure of, coming home, getting the A grades, being considered the top 1% of your class, getting to a good school, to a good university, to a well-paying job, that was very much part of my growing up. And so I pursued that avenue up until I went to college. So when I went to college, I pursued the career path of banking. I mistakenly believed that success was defined by my job title. And so there was this sort of discussion amongst my friends at school about, are you going to become a banker? Are you going to become a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant? So very much around those small set of traditional jobs. I started in the banking industry in the middle of 2007, Sanjay, at what was probably the worst possible time. I mean, this was 12 to 13 months before the financial crisis really started to engulf the planet, and with a company called Lehman Brothers. So it was a very volatile start to my career. I'm not going to lie, it was painful. I just didn't know where I was going at that point because I'd imagined that now I landed the job, as many people do when they're fresh out of university. I would work at it for a couple of years, work myself up the career ladder, get a good paycheck, and then evaluate maybe a few years down the line what I wanted to do, but not that early, not within 12 months of having your first job after graduation. And so I actually went through a period, it was probably around 3 or 4 years where I was just completely lost, Sanjay. After Lehman Brothers, I went to work in a hedge fund. And while it sounds glamorous on the outside, in reality, it was far from glamorous. Unless you were one of the senior managers in the team, they were the ones that kind of got all the glory, got the big paychecks. Me as a junior, I was pretty much like the T-boy. I was getting people's lunches. I was doing the operational side of the business. I was making sure there wasn't any errors. I was just making sure the business could continue as it was. And there was a moment in which I remember getting home really late at night, early morning, around sort of 3-4 o'clock in the morning. And I was just completely burnt out, Sanjay. I was telling my girlfriend at the time excuses to try and defend what I was doing. But in reality, I was using partying, drinking, binge watching TV series as a bit of escapism from the harsh reality of the fact that I had just got into a funk in my life. As a result of the crisis, I just didn't know where I was going. And I had got myself into this job in which it was killing my physical and mental health. And so that was how the journey of Simon started. It wasn't nice. It wasn't rosy, but it was going through those dark periods, which taught me a lot, Sanjay, in hindsight. And after the conversation I had with my girlfriend at the time, I realized that unless I addressed my physical health, then I would stand to lose everything. because this relationship would be going down the drain. I wouldn't have any time for myself, and I would just be feeling depressed and unhappy for such a long period. And so I handed in my resignation to this job, and I intentionally then went on to find another job within finance, but that was more 9 to 5. Was less stressful, was less intense, in which I could use the time outside of work and on weekends to address my health, to focus on the things I wanted to do, and just to find my feet again. And that started the journey to what I now get to do today, Sanjay. I started to follow my curiosities. I started to explore things. I got involved in 2 businesses which didn't work out, and that led me to coaching. I started coaching those in leadership positions. Although at the beginning it was anybody and everyone that wants to be coached, I'll coach you, to help build my experience. And then over the years, I've been very fortunate to now be able to be more selective as to who I work with. And then things started building from there, Sanjay, some of which you've kindly mentioned at the beginning of this episode. I went on to being invited to speak at companies, conferences, public events. And then one of the positives from the 2 years that the world went into lockdown as a result of the COVID pandemic, one of the 2 positives, apart from becoming a parent for the first time, was landing a book deal with the world's largest publishing house, Penguin.
Fantastic. I mean, that as a snapshot is in itself. There's so many places I want to dissect, but that was a summary. Would be to a movie would be amazing. Um, First question I've got for you, Simon, is if you could go back now to that. I guess you were early 20s when you just when all of this Lehman Brothers was going. If you go back when that moment where your world literally had collapsed, right? Your early 20s. I think I want people to imagine this. Your early 20s, you've been working your entire life in this, as you mentioned, in an academic way to secure yourself a future, to secure yourself a job that's going to give you security and growth and everything that we think that we want. And whether if that's what we want is actually something genuine is another conversation. And then you achieve that, right? And I worked in investment banking recruitment. So, Lehman Brothers, it's a prestigious name. And, so you land your job at Lehman Brothers and then it all gets taken away. What would you go back and tell that Simon right now?
I think if there's one thing I could tell that Simon at the time that this chaos engulfed my professional life, it's something that I came to learn, Sanjay, in 2017 on a visit to Kyoto in Japan. So I went to Kyoto and it's filled with beautiful Zen temples. And I remember my wife and I did a meditation experience, and it was like a 1 hour followed by a tour of the temple. And there were some inscriptions translated into English. And there's one statement that I began embracing as soon as I read it. And it's one bit of advice I would give to that Simon in his early 20s. And that inscription read, "Be attached to no outcome and open to everything." Be attached to no outcome and open to everything. And the reason I would impart those words of wisdom to the Simon Den is because when I grew up, I was so attached to the outcome, Sanjay, as I know many of us are. It's like, well, if I don't get the A, then I'm going to feel guilty and bad for my family because they won't be proud of me. Or if I don't manage to do well in this job or it doesn't work out, then I'm a failure. And so that's what happens when we attach ourselves too much to an outcome that in many cases are out of our control. I mean, I had no control over what was going to happen in the economy with my company. But I think that when we can detach ourselves from the outcome and simply be open to everything, that gives us permission to live in the present. And I think when we do that, that is when we can open our eyes to the abundance of opportunities around us. So that would be the one thing I would share with the Simon in his early 20s.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So from that moment, you went on this journey of discovery. However, you mentioned you worked for the hedge fund and you were in a low point. So, I'm sorry to hear that you went through that. And thank you so much for sharing that. What was going through your head at that moment? I mean, what I'm trying to get to is how did you get to that point? You said, I had to look after my physical health. I got to there was a moment where I realized I had to look after my physical health. How did that realization come about? Because as a health coach working with people who have pre-diabetes, that moment of awareness is so crucial because, without awareness, there's no change. So, but getting to the point of awareness, it's taken me, several decades of my life to get there. So you got there in a relatively short space of time. So what was it that got you to that point of awareness?
Well, first of all, Sanjay, I think you're spot on with what you share about awareness. I say that you can't have self development without self awareness, and that is because, as you noted, we can't change what we're not aware of, and that is why knowing ourselves is the beginning of true wisdom. Now, how I got to that awareness, if I'm honest, the answer is my girlfriend at the time, who became my wife. She really cared about me, and she challenged me. I'm not going to lie. I mean, she challenged me to open up. I grew up, as I said, as a very shy, introverted, academically focused young Chinese boy. Now, when I grew up, this was in a world. You have to keep in mind that when I was growing up, no one talked about mental health in the way that they do today, and there wasn't the sort of resources that you now have available in society. So I had always been told, whenever I went through tough situations, when I was facing challenges, whether in my personal life or my professional life, to man up, to suck it up, to get on with it. And those were very toxic at the time, but I didn't know. I just sort of thought, well, that's what I have to do. And so I was never comfortable sharing my emotions or feelings. And I think the only way that we become more aware of ourselves is actually by exploring those emotions and feelings that are going on inside our mind. And so my girlfriend challenged me to open up. She's the one that actually helped me get out my shell a lot as I sort of grew into my sort of 20s and early 30s. And by giving me that permission to just share with no judgment, I think was so useful, Sanjay. I think, in fact, just to have anyone who would listen to you, your mind, your thoughts with no judgment and just out of curiosity is such a gift. And I think that really helped me to get to a point of being more aware of not only what I was going through, but what I was doing to not just myself, but also our relationship. And I think that was very powerful because I didn't want to lose what we had created. And knowing that that was a risk really helps me to become aware of my involvement in that scenario.
Mm. You mentioned a word there, curiosity, and it's
Mm,
one I've heard you talk about, before, about being curious is, again, we talked about that tipping point is that we
mm,
following and going into your curiosity. So it was your curiosities at that time of, what am I doing to myself, or where can I take this? That it's interesting that opened you up to that level of awareness, which is
mm.
fascinating. And something else you've said in the past about, I believe it's your greatest lessons come in the most challenging
Yeah.
moments. And I think
Mm,
you just reflected there that through those moments where your girlfriend, has challenged you,
mm.
even though you were in those darkest moments, there's probably you look back now, and would you say that they're some of the biggest lessons that you've learned?
Definitely. You know what, Sanjay? It's a very good point because whenever I get asked about my life lessons, sometimes the follow up question is, where did you learn that? Where did you get that insight or that clarity and wisdom? And if I were to reference all the lessons I've had, I would say the vast majority have come from those moments that have been dark, where I've faced setbacks, where I've had failures and challenges. Of course, we had the Lehman Brothers collapse. We had the burnout experience at the hedge fund.
Mm.
We also had the time when I was 17 years old and I lost my mum to a tragic accident. I had the time in which my first two businesses failed. And so I think all of these experiences have equipped me with the wisdom and the insight I now have. And I don't think I would have had many of them if I hadn't gone through them. And so what I've come to realize as I've got older and wiser is that by reframing challenges into something positive, we can actually use it as fuel to come back stronger. So rather than seeing it as a negative and seeing it as, well, I didn't overcome it, or this is a block on my path, it's to just, well, look at it in the sense that without that challenge, you would not have grown. Without that challenge, you wouldn't have seen just how powerful you are. And without that challenge, maybe you wouldn't have come across it from a new perspective. And so I think that when we start seeing these so-called negative life events as actually positives and as the universe's way to teach us something, then that's when we begin to tap into the eternal student mindset.
Yeah, it's definitely the framing, isn't it? There
Mhm.
about the experience, and look, in everything, the moments you just mentioned there, in those moments at that point in time, it's of course the one of the worst things that
Mm,
you probably experience, and it's and I want to be clear, we're not saying that in that moment you're going to
mm,
suddenly think, oh, what am I going to learn from this? There's going to be trauma, there's going to be heartache, there's
mm,
going to be whatever it might be, but at some point in the future. And yeah, and I just feel like with age, I've looked back and only then have I realized, oh, that moment when that happened when I was 16, that's what that taught me. And that
Mm,
is a value that I still hold today. And I think that process, people just, for me anyway, it was a case of giving myself time. And that
definitely.
was also a journey of learning about myself and what my values are. So I think that's really, really important in the way that you said that. But
Mm,
it's interesting we're getting into that realm of mindset and how we can phrase things differently. And just
mm.
by framing things differently, how much of an impact that has on our outcomes as well.
Totally. I mean, one of the and it's something I write in my book, Sanjay, is that one of the things we come to realize, especially when we start working on ourselves, is that there is no one reality. We like to think there's one reality, but there really isn't. There is only customized reality. So, when an event occurs, the way you interpret it might be different to the way I do, different to the way my partner does, to my friend or my family member. Now, that is because we are living in the feeling of our thinking moment to moment to moment, with our thoughts as the paintbrush on our canvas of reality. So, whatever we bring into our mind, that paints the reality that we experience. Now, for me, knowing that gives us a superpower that many of us underappreciate. And that is, at any moment, we can choose one thought over another. In the same way that if you want to paint with a different color, you simply wash your brush, take up another color, and you choose a new color to put on your canvas. We have that ability as well. We can choose a different meaning, a different thought for an experience or event, thereby reconfiguring the choices, actions, and behaviors that we make.
So thoughts, are we talk about thoughts, they do lead to actions. And something that
Mhm.
we talk about in our program is that not only that, but there's a physical response within the body, right? And I think this is where the power of thoughts has really kind of caught my attention, because you
Mhm.
just think, oh, sometimes it's just a thought. But actually, if we engage in that thought, and whether it's a helpful thought, or let's say it's an unhelpful thought,
Mhm.
then we start to get physical responses within the body, which are not going to be helpful in the long term either.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, there was a fascinating study. It was done by someone who delivered a TED talk, and I believe her name from memory is Kelly McGonigal. And she talks about stress, and there was a fascinating study, and it showed that stress can be good, but it's our understanding of stress that determines if it's good or bad. And she's a psychologist, and she did a study in which she took two sample groups. And in one sample group, they were the sort of people that believed the stress was bad. In the other sample group, it was people that believed stress was good in small amounts. And what they decided to do was to measure their responses to certain activities, questions, and exercises. And what they discovered was that the sample group that believed that stress was good in small amounts actually had no negative or material negative effects on their health. Whereas the group that believed that stress was bad actually showed signs of negative impact on their health. And
Wow.
so this all comes back down to our interpretation of things that we experience in our life and around us.
Yeah, it's so powerful, and this kind of links in nicely with what I want to ask you about with regards to the book, because of all the things that you could have spoken about and written a book about, you chose energy. So let's get into that. How did you arrive at this topic, and and yeah, tell us a bit about the thought process there.
Sure. So I think there were a couple of inputs into that process. The first is going back to the story that I shared at the beginning about how I burnt out. That really showed me how important it is to have energy in life. We can have a vision, we can have a plan set out on how we're going to manifest that vision, but if we simply don't have the energy to follow through and execute on that plan, we're not going to make any progress. We're going to be stuck with where we're at. And so I knew that because I went through a period of my life in which I literally had no energy, no motivation, no inspiration, and I just was aimless. But as soon as I started addressing my physical and mental energy, things started changing. Things started changing drastically and in very crazy ways. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about that. Secondly, is that when I looked at some of the most successful individuals, Sanjay, in any field, what I noticed is that they weren't necessarily the fastest or the most intelligent at what they did, but they were the best when it comes to managing their energy. Because they know if you're going to run a business, if you're going to pursue something that you're passionate about, consistency always beats intensity. And in order to show up every day for the next decade or even next 50 or 60 years of your life, you've got to have the energy to do so, because you want to thrive, not just survive. And they understand that you cannot do your best work if you're always showing up exhausted and completely drained of any energy. So that's the second reason. The third is something I noticed, Sanjay, as I was speaking on more stages. I would reflect on the fact that when I came off the stage, I would get people come up to me, and I would have many comments in which people would say to me, Simon, I absolutely loved your energy on stage. It was electric. And you know what, Simon? If I had just a little bit of your energy, I think I could go on and accomplish so much more. And so I really wanted to speak to that, Sanjay. First of all, well, my journey in terms of how I've gone from having no energy to having the energy that I want to do so many things now, and that this mind of mine just wants to keep learning, to how did I get to that point so people can also experience it? So we're sort of blending those two thoughts and experiences together, and hopefully people find value in that.
I love that. And just going back to what you said about the energy, it's there's got to be a link between the person coming up to you and saying, if I only had a little, I loved your energy. Do you feel like the Simon who was in banking would have had a similar energy as the Simon who's coming off stage after a speaking gig?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And this speaks to me about what I call spiritual energy, Sanjay.
Right.
Because one of the things I've begun to realize, and it's something I journaled. So I journal every day in a notepad. And one of the thoughts I was writing down a number of years ago was the fact that many of us are exhausted, not because we're doing too much, but because we are running someone else's race, because we are measuring our progress against metrics determined by other people. And once we do that, that is a race we can never win. And so the Simon that was in the banking world was measuring his success by other people's definition, i.e., be a banker, work for a great company, earn a good paycheck, start a family, buy a house. These were definitions and metrics set by other people, but not me. But when I embarked on the path that I now am on, this was Simon understanding what success meant to him, what sort of impact he wanted to have in the world, and then building a life around those answers. And so that's when my spiritual energy started to ignite, Sanjay. And I think that's where the energy comes from. I talk about in the introduction of my book that energy is like a language, but it has no words. You and I can feel it, we can sense it, but we can't often explain it. And that's what I was accessing. I was accessing that life force that we all have inside of us. But for many of us, it remains dormant until very late in our life.
Yeah, I love that, and I describe it as the sort of energy when I think back to when I was younger, when I speak to a girl, right? You speak to a potential partner. You feel that if there's a connection or there's a energy there, and yes, it's absolutely linked to the Simon that walks off the stage. You are out there talking about things that are aligned to your values, aligned to your purpose. So there's a completely different energy there, and I've experienced that myself in working in that city life.
Mm.
I felt like I didn't have any energy at that point. I've just like you, I went through burnout. I went through, overworking myself, doing that, working that cookie cutter life, I call it, that what you think you need to, the life, the trajectory of your life. And I was ticking off those markers. I got the job, I got the car, I got the house, and as you go and eventually you realize that you don't enjoy anything, but linking it back to what I do now in that, coming off the back of a coaching session, a conversation like this, the energy is so different. And, I just feel like I can achieve a lot more. And I remember when I made the transition to work as a personal trainer, and I was working, really extremely long hours, and people used to think, oh, how are you working so many hours? And it never even occurred to me. I was like, well, I don't feel like it's work. That was the big thing for me. I didn't feel like, oh, here we go, I have to get up and go back to work at 6:00 in the evening. It just felt natural to do, and the energy, I can't explain where I generate from, but I like the idea of this spiritual energy, which is kind of driving you in this way.
Totally. I mean, it's what we call, I guess Einstein would call it, the relativity of time. You sit next to a beautiful girl, and an hour will seem like a minute. You sit next to a hot fire, a minute will feel like an hour. And so when you're doing something that ignites your passion and something that comes natural to you, that plays to your strengths, that's when we experience this so-called flow state, in which we are in sync, we're going with our motion, our momentum, and hours just fly by. but we don't feel it because we're tapping into who we are. We're in connection with our spiritual energy.
Mm. So we've got the spiritual energy, we've got the mental energy, and there's the physical side as well. So I mean, this may sound like an obvious area, but there's a lot more to this. And what sort of things are draining our physical energy in 2022?
Sure. For me, it's as simple as sleep and rest.
Mm.
It may sound cliche given what lots of people speak about, but I think it's true. When we want to get things done, often the first thing we sacrifice is sleep and rest. We think that by sacrificing sleep and rest, we have more time to do work. But actually, it's counterproductive because what happens is without sleep and rest, it takes longer to do the work. You can't think clearly. And so actually, you get even less sleep and rest and you get even less done. So it becomes a vicious cycle. And so for me, when we look at the world today, Sanjay, it is probably the most distracted society we have ever lived in. When you think about the demands on our attention, the notifications, the emails, the text messages, people demanding your energy. So when you put that all into consideration, slowing down in today's world is increasingly becoming a superpower, especially if you are somebody who is ambitious or in a leadership position. Because I think we have mistakenly assumed that by achieving productivity, we have to be always doing. We have to be always doing something. And if we're not, we feel guilty. We feel like we're lazy. But we fail to appreciate the power of slowing down and actually including in our calendar periods of intentional rest, as much as the periods that we schedule in our diary for social events, holiday events, and meetings.
So it's so simple, that, right, scheduling in, because you think about it, what do people schedule? And it is the things that it's work, it's I must get done. And I've recently started doing that as well. I'll have just a section, and I never used to schedule my weekends because I think, well, I'm not doing anything that needs scheduling, but actually there are really important things that I'm doing. So, I'll schedule in fun or going to the park with the daughter or, washing the car or whatever it might be. But actually that for me has been so powerful because it's also made me aware of whether actually, am I doing things that are fun? Am I doing things that are serving me, that don't have anything to do with, earning money or the job? And I think that is an interesting way to frame it for people. But yeah, definitely the scheduling has been a big changer.
It's very important, Sanjay, because when we schedule in meetings and social events, what happens? We make them. We turn up to the meeting. We turn up to record a podcast. We turn up for a social event to meet friends. When it's scheduled, it is real. But the thing is, when we don't schedule it, it isn't real. And nobody plans to aimlessly scroll through their social media for the whole weekend or watch a whole series of a Netflix show. But that is exactly what happens when we don't intentionally schedule our time. So when we don't intentionally schedule periods of rest or just to unwind, to go for a walk, to read a book, if those aren't scheduled in, guess what is scheduled in? Your distractions. They will dominate the time that you haven't scheduled or accounted for. And that's why many people say, I can't believe where all the time's gone. They look back at a weekend or a week or a month and say, I can't believe where all the time's gone. And that's because they haven't managed their time. They haven't managed how they're spending their energy. And so what happens is, as Jim Rohn would once say, if you don't plan your day, the day will plan you. And so you've got to be more responsible and intentional with how you live each day, because if you want to design your life, it begins with designing your days.
Yeah, I think back now as a father, and I'm sure you'll resonate with this. I think back to when we didn't have kids, and I just think, oh my goodness, I threw away so much time. The amount of Netflix shows and just sitting around doing nothing. And now I'm thinking, gosh, now I definitely know. I thought I didn't have time then, but let alone with a child. I'm sure that's something that you found. So it is. You're absolutely right. It's how intentional you are with that time and and what you're doing with it. So let's talk about that, because that's something that you've recently experienced. Of course, you mentioned over the COVID pandemic, you had your first child. Is that right?
First child, correct.
Fantastic. Congratulations. So how did that change the energy for you, and what impact has that had for you?
It's interesting, Sanjay, because it's influenced my energy in different ways. And I think many of which you cannot predict until you become a parent. So in some ways, it has energized me even more. So, for example, with the work that I do, now that I'm a father, I've got even more motivation to want to make her proud as a father. That's given me energy to want to pursue things that I may not have done before, because I'm looking at her and I think she's now my legacy. I want to make her proud. I want to make this family proud. So that in a way has energized me from a spiritual perspective. Now, of course, on the physical side, there is the obvious demands on your energy, such as sleepless nights and, having to adjust your routine and schedule to the fact that you are now around the newborn, which for many of us, we had nowhere to go because we can only stay inside. We couldn't venture outside over the last couple of years. And so that did affect me, especially when you're writing a 65,000 word book at the same time. But one question I've been asked recently, Sanjay, is, do you feel more productive or less productive now becoming a parent? And it's interesting because I, like some parents I know who are also entrepreneurs, have actually felt more productive becoming a parent. And here's why. Because before you are a parent and you have no obligations to anybody else apart from yourself and maybe your partner, well, if you wanted to, you could just procrastinate all day and do your work in the middle of the night. There's no boundaries that you need because technically you can always push things back and procrastinate. But now you've got a child. When your child is with you, you cannot work. You've got to be present with him or her, and they want your attention. And so now knowing, Sanjay, that when my child is in nursery, I've only got X hours in order to get work done, that actually makes me more productive, because I have to ask myself, if I only have these hours that I can get work done, what is the most important for me to address so that by the time my daughter comes back from nursery, I know I've had a productive day, so that I can not feel guilty when I then spend the rest of the evening with her.
Yeah, it's just made you more intentional with your time, because
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. Time is scarce. And I remember that moment when she first went to nursery and I was like, oh, thank goodness. But then, like you said, it's like, oh, now I've only got this window, and I'm sure they're the same, but that window is never long enough. But it did make me, and I agree that it made me more productive. It made me think about what, like you said, what is the most important thing that I need to do, and that procrastination and that those moments where you just throw away did come down. So that's it's fascinating you say that as well. Just stay on the child, sort of our learnings as parents. And I know this is something that someone has also recently asked you, but I'm keen to just get your take on this. Is what have you learned from being a father? What have you learned? What have you learned from your child? How old is your daughter?
So she's just past 2 years now, so coming up to 2 years and 1 month.
So she's getting into talking, and she's
Yeah.
probably got her own personality and character. So yeah, what have you learned from her?
If I'm honest, Sanjay, I've learned so much, and I think the reason I've learned so much is because I think no other generation has probably spent the first 2 years with their child every single day. Because before the pandemic, the tradition was at least one of the parents would be back to work within 3 or 4 months of the birth. But for the first 2 or so years, I've been pretty much at home every day with my daughter. And so I've been able to learn so much from the bond that we have created. And just some of the lessons that I've learned from her, Sanjay, first of all, is patience. Once you become a parent, you've got to be incredibly patient, because you realize that their brain has not evolved to where your brain is. They're learning everything for the first time. They don't know when they make a mistake. They don't know if they've done something wrong because that concept hasn't occurred to them yet. They're just simply exploring through their curiosity all the objects and things around them. And so patience is one of the things that I've learned so much about. Second is the energy of being present. I think in the everyday, when you're not a parent, you can get so caught up with the busyness of, especially living in a city and also running a business, you can get so caught up with everything. But when you're with your child, they teach you to be absolutely present in that moment, to find joy in that connection. And that's something that I've learned from my daughter, Sienna. And I think the last one is just to not take things seriously. With Sienna, what happens is that she'll get scared of something, and next minute she's laughing. Next minute she's like wanting to rush out and try something new, and she's just living in a moment. But she's, not letting herself get caught up with anything. So she's just having fun. She's not taking things seriously, and she's enjoying the beauty of just exploring this world around us.
Yeah, just so present, aren't they? At this age, and I think that for me has been the biggest lesson for me. Is just just as you said, one moment it's the end of the world, the ice cream's dropped onto the floor, and the next minute there's interest in the water pit, and then it's it's switched off, and we're over there, and we're engrossed in that, and that makes me think as well about some of the things that happen in my life, and how I would. Oh, I dropped the ice cream, or that I dropping the ice cream could have been, replying to an email a certain way, or something that happened earlier in the day, but you procrastinate on it, whereas a child would just go flick from one place to another. So I think there's patience. I love that, definitely. And for me, another one actually that I've come to realize is self-compassion.
Yeah.
Is because I've caught myself talking the way I would, talk to my daughter if something didn't go that well, and then just maybe catch myself thinking, well, I would talk to myself in a lot harsher way sometimes. So that's made me kind of realize that actually remind yourself that in those moments when things are not going so great and you're having a tough time, treat yourself like I would treat my daughter. And I think because I've got, not that I treat my wife, in a bad way, I treat, but when you've got that small precious thing that is, you're there ultimately to look after them. You do. For me, I just felt a much deeper sense of compassion there.
Definitely. I really feel you on that, Sanjay, because I think the experience teaches us that we need to speak to ourselves as kind as we do to our child or to people that we love.
Yeah. So there's this kindness, connection. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about connection, because when we talk about lifestyle medicine, this idea of connection, as well, is starting to come up a lot in literature, and it's been spoken about a lot. And I want to just get your take on how important, from an energy perspective, is connection with others as well. And I guess we can look to what's happened recently in the world to highlight this. But what's your take on that?
I think it's crucial in the sense that if we don't explore, first of all, the connection to ourself, i.e. our true self, and then connection with others, well, you're going to realize at some point you do need help from other people. And you do need to have those relationships around you, because, when you think about happiness, the experience of happiness mostly comes from relationships we have around us, whether that's from your partner, your loved ones, your family, your close friends. And if we haven't really cultivated that circle around us, then who is going to support us in those moments where we do have setbacks and challenges, and when we need somebody to just hear what we're going through? Just as I did when I was in that situation and my girlfriend challenged me to open up, and she was there for me. She held that space for me. And that for me was a beautiful place to connect with her. And so for me, I think it's increasingly important in today's world, Sanjay. In fact, I think a lot of people, because of COVID and because they couldn't go outside, many people have entered this space of reflection to connect to themselves. Bronnie Ware wrote in a book, The Top Regrets of the Dying, that the number one regret was, I wish I lived a life more true to myself than a life lived for others. And because everyone had to go inside, that allowed people to connect with themselves again, to understand, well, is this what I really want to do? Is this something that fulfills me? And I think part of that is the reason why we've had this so-called Great Resignation, this term that has come out of the United States, of people resigning en masse from the industries or the work that they've been doing, because in some respects, I think by connecting to themselves, they've experienced an awakening of sort, of like, well, I've got to take some action to shift my life back into something that brings me fulfillment and joy. And connection is almost the beginning of that.
Yeah, it's ignited curiosity, isn't it? It's almost, I feel like, this is not pointing fingers at anyone, but I feel like as you look at a child's life, and as that child gets older, and you think of this the system that they go through, I feel like curiosity is almost it's squeezed out at every stage, and you get to a point where you're 18, 19. Again, this doesn't happen to everyone, but this is my experience of it. And just like you said, like, oh, I need to get a degree, I need to get a job, I need to. So the curiosity of what else is there, it's almost drummed out of you by that point, and we stop becoming curious, and we just follow this mold. And what COVID has seemed to have done for a lot of people, as you said, it's this awakening. It's this, hold on a minute, there is more out there. There is more that I want to explore. There are lots of things that I haven't done, and I mean, I welcome that, because I think this is going to lead to, a better and wonderful world. If someone, we just think about the things in our lives that people have become curious about. And we're here doing what we're doing now. Someone at some stage, I remember when we were kids, we used to watch, Star Trek and things where people would have on hand, but someone had that curiosity to develop that. And I think if we're going through this period now where people are starting to switch on, then that's only going to be a positive for the world going forward.
Definitely. I couldn't agree with what you shared there, Sanjay.
So the book, it's out very soon, because by the time this podcast goes out, it will be out. Tell us about where people can find it, what they're gonna learn from the book, I guess as well from the author's perspective.
Yeah, so you can find out more and purchase a copy at getenergizebook.com, and that is Energize with a Z. The way that I approach the book, Sanjay, is I've been very much influenced by lots of books in my time, from going from an employee to becoming an entrepreneur. I've always enjoyed the narrative styles and storytelling elements of the likes of The Go-Giver, the Robin Sharma books, Who Moved My Cheese, The Richest Man in Babylon. But I've also enjoyed the more practical books, where they walk you through exercises, questions, and activities that can help you apply some of the knowledge. And so I wanted to blend those two styles, which have had a big influence on me, because I love telling stories. I'm a speaker, I'm a presenter, but I also love giving people tools and techniques that they can apply. And so what I did in the book is I broke the book into 4 parts, very much, if you will, a summary of my own journey. And so the first part of the book is called Awaken Your Power, which very much speaks to the beginning of my journey. So in that part of the book, we look at vision, we look at gratitude, we look at physical health. And then we go to the second part of the book, which is rewiring your energetic state. And a lot of that has to do with the mental energy. How do we begin to understand the way the mind works? The third part is then called Protect Your Personal Energy, because once you've got yourself to a point in which you are living with more energy, you've then got to be careful to protect it. Because otherwise you're just going to be leaking energy all over the place. So how do you protect your energy for what matters most? And then the final part is really speaking to what I'm now doing today, which is how do we go about supercharging your impact? Because for me, if I start with the first part, go to the last part of the book, the fact that it mirrors my journey is also a reflection of my journey from shifting my attention away from focusing on career virtues to legacy virtues. And that's why thinking about legacy at the end of the book, I thought was a very apt way to finish off.
I love that. So it's a very kind of nice journey that people will go on, and the way that you've framed that is a very interesting way. I'm looking forward to reading the book. I can't wait to see it. I wish you all the success with the book. I'll put the link in the episode description. One thing I want to just leave it with, the podcast here is called Stay Whole, and it's all about kind of keeping ourselves whole. What I wanted to know from you, Simon, and maybe the listeners are interested as well, what are some of your non-negotiable habits that help you to stay whole or keep your energy?
Sure. So I'll share 3 things when I think of non-negotiable habits that keep me feeling whole and healthy. The first is exercise. That was the very first thing that I addressed when I started to sort of shift my attention to my energy, was I need to exercise more. And so that has been one of the greatest game-changing habits that I have embraced. So for me, every single day I am keeping myself active, even if it's a short yoga session to something more intense. I'm always doing something consistently just to keep my energy high. The second is something that I learned from a mentor who's in my field called Rich Litvin. And he speaks about 2 things that we should be prioritizing every single week. They are serve and create. So who can I serve this week? What can I create this week? Now, every week, if you are serving and you are creating, that is you being whole, because the creating part is bringing value into the world. And the serving part is just reminding you of the humanity behind what you do. And then the third part is to constantly reflect on the question of how do you want to be remembered? So to ask yourself, how do I want to be remembered? Because I think when you do so, it reminds you of the fact that our value is determined by how much more we have given to the world than we have taken from it.
That's beautiful. I love that. I think there's you've kind of summed it all up really, really nicely there, Simon. Simon, thank you so much for your time today. And as I said, all the best of luck with the book, and I look forward to seeing a lot more of your growth.
Perfect. Sanjay, thank you so much again for inviting me to be a guest on your show.